The courtroom of the Hargrove County Civil Court is the kind of room designed to remind you of your own smallness. Vaulted ceilings, dark mahogany paneling, the smell of old paper, old wood, old authority, fluorescent light that strips the warmth from every face and leaves only truth, or the performance of it. And in the middle of all that enormous, indifferent architecture, she sits alone. Elena Marchetti-Voss, seated at the left table of the plaintiff's side. Her attorney's chair beside her is occupied by Diana Reyes, but the gallery behind her, the rows of wooden benches where family sits, where support sits, where love is supposed to sit, is empty. Every single bench on Elena's side of the courtroom, empty. On the other side, Damien Voss sits surrounded. His lead attorney, Preston Caldwell, silver-haired, $900 an hour confident, leans toward him whispering. Richard, his brother, fills the bench directly behind him like ballast. Victoria sits 2 rows back, composed and glowing. 3 associates occupy the remaining space, all in expensive suits, all radiating the collective energy of people who are entirely certain of the outcome. Damien turns his head. He looks at Elena. And he smiles. Not a polite smile. Not even a cruel smile. Something far more devastating than either. A satisfied smile. The smile of a man looking at something he has already dismissed. Already filed away. Already moved past. He turns back to his attorney and says something low, and Preston Caldwell's mouth curves. Richard, behind them, makes a sound, not quite a laugh, quiet enough for the courtroom, loud enough to reach Elena. Elena does not look at them. She looks forward. Her hands are folded on the table in front of her, perfectly still. Her spine is straight. Her face is a portrait of composed dignity that has cost her something most people cannot imagine. She is completely alone, and every single person in this room knows it. Every single person, except Elena herself. The proceedings begin. Judge Eleanor Hayes enters without fanfare, she never needs any, takes her seat at the elevated bench, and surveys the room with the practiced calm of a woman who has spent 30 years watching human beings perform the worst versions of themselves in the most formal setting possible. She calls the session to order. Preston Caldwell rises immediately, because that is his strategy, to establish presence, to fill the room before Diana Reyes can, and he begins. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of contested asset division in the dissolution of a 7-year marriage. My client, Mr. Damien Voss, is prepared to demonstrate that Mrs. Voss, despite her claims, contributed nothing of documented, measurable value to the growth of Voss Capital Group during the period in question. He pauses. He lets that land. Nothing. A murmur from the gallery. From Damien's side of the gallery. Elena's hands, folded on the table, tighten, just slightly, just barely. Diana Reyes places her own hand over them, once, brief, like a signal, hold. Caldwell continues, moving now, pacing with the ease of a man who owns every room he enters. She entered this marriage with no assets, no income, no professional standing of consequence. She departed it after benefiting from 7 years of Mr. Voss's considerable financial generosity, with demands that would strip from him and his family legacy nearly 40% of holdings that were built long before she arrived. He turns, very deliberately, toward Elena's empty gallery. The empty benches. Your Honor, the petitioner comes before this court today, he gestures broadly, theatrically, as she has faced this entire proceeding, without a single witness of character to speak on her behalf, without a single corroborating presence from her personal or professional sphere. He pauses again. That absence speaks volumes. A ripple of sound from Damien's gallery. Not laughter, too sophisticated for that. Satisfied murmuring. The sound of people who have gathered to watch a predetermined conclusion. Richard Voss leans back in his bench, arms crossed, a slow smile spreading. Victoria looks at her manicured fingernails. Diana Reyes rises. Your Honor, my client is present. Her documentation is present. her case is present. The number of bodies in her gallery is entirely irrelevant to the legal merit of... It's quite relevant, Caldwell interrupts smoothly as a character portrait of counsel. Judge Hayes's voice, not loud, absolute. You will not interrupt opposing counsel in my courtroom. Caldwell bows his head, untroubled, but the damage of his theater is already sitting in the air of the room. Because the truth is, and Elena knows it, the empty gallery is a portrait. Not the portrait Caldwell intends, but a portrait nonetheless, of a woman who has spent 7 years being slowly, systematically isolated. Damien had been elegant about it, the way a skilled surgeon is elegant. He had not made scenes, had not issued ultimatums, not at first. He had simply redirected. Her friendships became inconveniences. Her family became complications. Phone calls went unreturned. Visits became awkward, then rare, then absent. By year 3 of the marriage, Elena had almost no one left in her immediate orbit that Damien had not in some way shaped, influenced, or managed. And now here, in this courtroom, on the most consequential day of the life she is trying to reclaim, the architecture of her isolation is on full display. A woman approaches Elena from the gallery, not from her side, from the back aisle, someone who had been considering sitting in Elena's section and then, catching Damien's attorney's eye, veers away and takes a seat in the center neutral section instead. Elena watches this. She sees it. And something passes across her face, the briefest tremor, the tiniest crack in the porcelain before the composure returns. She breathes. She folds her hands more deliberately. And she faces forward. Because Elena Marchetti-Voss has always known something that no one in this courtroom has thought to consider, the empty bench behind her is not evidence of her weakness. It is the final act of a strategy that is not yet finished. Let us go back. Not far. Just far enough. Elena Marchetti was born in a villa above the Ligurian coast, in a town so small it does not appear on most maps, to a family so old that the Marchetti name appears in regional land records dating to 1648. Her father, Augusto Marchetti, did not inherit wealth. He built upon it, transformed a family estate and modest agricultural holdings into Marchetti International, a privately held conglomerate with significant stakes in European real estate, luxury hospitality, sustainable agriculture, and Mediterranean shipping. The family's net worth is not publicly listed because Augusto Marchetti has always believed that announcing your wealth is the behavior of people who are not entirely secure in it. He has never announced anything. He has simply been. Elena's grandmother, Constanza Marchetti, La Nana, as the entire extended family calls her, is the kind of woman nations use to build their institutions around. She raised 6 children, buried a husband and a son, navigated the economic upheavals of post-war Italy with what can only be described as elegant ferocity, and has never once in 86 years allowed circumstance to define her. She once told Elena, when Elena was 9 years old and crying over a broken friendship, a Marchetti does not perform her pain for an audience. She saves it for God and spends the rest of her time making sure it never happens again. Elena has never forgotten it. When Elena met Damien Voss at a Geneva investment conference 12 years ago, her family, to their credit, was cautious. Augusto met Damien twice and told Elena afterward he is a man in love with the idea of things rather than the things themselves. Watch carefully what he loves about you. Make sure it is you. Elena was 22. She was in love. She did not watch carefully enough. What she did not know at the time was that Damien had done his research. He knew who the Marchettis were. He knew the family's private holdings, their connections, their generational wealth. He had approached Elena with the specific, calculated attention of a man who understood that marrying into a family like hers, even without direct access to their assets, would confer upon him a level of social credibility that money alone could not purchase. He wanted the name, the connection. The implication: he simply had not anticipated that Augusto Marchetti, upon learning of the marriage, would draw a quiet, dignified, but absolute line. The Marchetti wealth was Marchetti wealth. It would remain so. Elena would be supported personally, but no family assets, no family connections, no family influence would be made available to Damien Voss's enterprises. Damien had smiled and accepted this, and then spent the next 7 years resenting it. Here is what Elena chose to do when the marriage collapsed and the legal proceedings began. She called her father. Augusto Marchetti listened for 22 minutes without interrupting. Then he said, very quietly, "Tell me everything. Leave nothing out." She did. And when she finished, Augusto said, "I am coming." Elena had said, "Papa, not yet. Please. I need to do the first part myself. I need him to believe he has already won. If you arrive too soon, his attorneys will pivot. They will prepare. They will adapt. I need them completely certain. I need them comfortable." Augusto had been silent for a long moment. Then, "You sound like your grandmother." "I am trying to." "Elena." His voice had changed. It had become the voice he used when he was speaking not as a patriarch, but as a father. Raw and simple. "You are not alone in this. Do you understand me? You have never been alone in this. Whatever you need us to be, invisible, present, overwhelming, we will be. You lead. We follow." And so Elena had walked into this courtroom today, alone, deliberately, strategically, and let Damien Voss build his entire case on the foundation of her apparent abandonment. She had let him stand in front of a judge and gesture at empty benches. She had let Preston Caldwell perform his expensive theater. She had let Richard Voss smirk. She had let Victoria Ashworth sit in her blush blazer and feel like a woman who had won something. Because Elena Marchetti-Voss had learned something in 7 years of marriage to a man who underestimated her, the most powerful thing you can give your enemy is the certainty that you are finished. By 11:15 in the morning, Damien Voss is practically radiant. Preston Caldwell has presented 3 financial experts, 2 character assessments, and a carefully constructed narrative in which Elena is painted as a woman who contributed beauty and social grace to a marriage, but nothing of legal or financial substance, and who now, upon its ending, is attempting to extract wealth she did not generate. It is a brutal portrait. And in the absence of visible support, no family, no close friends, no prominent figures of character seated behind her, it is landing with terrible effectiveness. Damien leans toward Caldwell during a brief recess and says, low enough for only their table to hear, "She really came here alone." I almost feel sorry for her. He does not feel sorry for her. The word almost is doing extraordinary work in that sentence. Richard, passing behind him, squeezes his shoulder, the gesture of a man confirming a victory already assumed. Victoria, in the gallery, catches Damien's eye across the room. A small smile. He returns it. Diana Reyes has been measured, precise, and unshakably professional throughout the morning. She has raised objections with surgical accuracy, introduced documentation with quiet authority, and refused, entirely and completely, to perform anxiety. This, actually, has been the first thing to give Preston Caldwell the faintest whisper of unease. He has faced frightened opposing counsel. He has faced angry opposing counsel. He has faced inexperienced counsel who sweat through their collars. Diana Reyes does not sweat. She does not perform. She moves through this case with the particular confidence of a woman who knows exactly how this story ends. It is a small thing. He files it away. Elena, for her part, checks her phone once during the recess. A single message. No words. Only a photograph. A car. Dark. Pulling away from an airport terminal. Her amber eyes read it. She puts the phone face down on the table. Something in the set of her shoulders changes, so subtly that only Diana, seated beside her, notices. Diana says nothing. She simply uncaps her pen with the ghost of a smile. The afternoon session begins. Caldwell, sensing momentum, decides to go for a theatrical finishing blow. He requests that Judge Hayes note for the record the conspicuous and telling absence of any character witness or personal support for the petitioner. He looks at Elena as he says it. He wants her to feel it. Elena looks back at him. Directly. Fully. Without flinching. And then, just for a moment, her eyes move to the large double doors at the back of the courtroom. She looks at them for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looks back at Judge Hayes. Caldwell follows her gaze, a reflex, involuntary, and sees nothing but the closed mahogany doors. He turns back, dismissing it. But something small and cold has moved through him. Something he cannot name. He adjusts his cuffs. He clears his own throat. He continues. At 2:47 in the afternoon, Preston Caldwell does the thing he has been building toward all day. He calls for a brief direct address to the court, a final summary statement before Judge Hayes prepares her initial findings on the asset division framework. He stands. He straightens his jacket. He turns to Elena, not to the judge, to Elena specifically, and he speaks. Mrs. Voss. His voice is rich with theatrical compassion, the kind that makes contempt sound like concern. I want to say, before this court, that no one in this room takes any pleasure in the dissolution of a marriage. He pauses. But I would ask this court to consider the totality of what we see before us today. He gestures, again, at her empty gallery. A woman who, in 7 years of marriage, built no community of meaningful personal relationships substantial enough to produce a single individual willing to appear in this room on her behalf. He lets that breathe. No family, no friends, no colleagues, no one. The room is very quiet. Judge Hayes watches from behind her glasses with the expression of a woman collecting information. Richard Voss makes a sound, barely audible, a quiet exhale of satisfaction. Victoria's chin dips slightly. Agreement in the body language of someone who has been waiting for this moment. And then, something happens. Something no one plans for. Because it is real. Elena's composure, that extraordinary, carefully constructed, deeply won composure, cracks. Not completely, not dramatically, not in the way of a woman who collapses or weeps or makes a scene. It cracks the way fine porcelain cracks, one hairline fracture, barely visible, devastating to anyone who knows what they are looking at. Her jaw tightens. Her eyes fill, not with tears that fall, but with tears that gather, collected at the lower lash line and absolutely refused passage. She is 34 years old. She has been in this building since 8 this morning. She has sat alone in the quiet of her side of this room for 6 hours, while the man who promised to love her performed her destruction for a room full of strangers. She has held her spine straight. She has kept her hands still. She has not once looked to the gallery behind her. But in this moment, in this precise, particular, unbearable moment, a single tear escapes. Just one. It tracks silently down her left cheek. She does not wipe it. She does not move. She simply lets it fall, the way dignified people let the things they cannot control simply pass through them, and then she lifts her chin. The double doors at the back of the courtroom do not open yet. There is no sound from the corridor. No sign. Just Elena, alone. And the tear drying on her face like a seal being set on something, like the last breath before something vast and irreversible begins. The doors open. They do not burst. They do not slam. They do not announce themselves with anything so crude as sudden violence. They open, slowly, deliberately, with the particular gravity of something that has been held closed for precisely as long as it needed to be. And the sound of them, the deep, resonant sweep of mahogany on brass hinges, moves through the courtroom like a frequency. Everyone feels it before they understand it. Preston Caldwell stops speaking. not because he chooses to. Because something in the room has changed so fundamentally that language becomes irrelevant for a moment, the body simply stops, registers, recalibrates. He turns. Everyone turns. The first thing they see is Marco Marchetti. He enters the courtroom like a man who has measured every room he has ever entered and found none of them sufficient. He is dressed in a suit so dark it absorbs the courtroom's fluorescent light, perfectly tailored, not a crease displaced by travel, not a hair out of place despite the fact that he has been moving continuously for 14 hours. His jaw is set. His dark eyes find Elena immediately, across the length of the entire room, and something passes between them. Brother and sister. The specific, wordless language of people who share blood and history and the particular grief of watching someone they love suffer. He takes his position inside the doorway and steps to the side, because Marco Marchetti is not the entrance. Marco Marchetti is the introduction. Augusto Marchetti enters the courtroom. He feels the doorway, not because of his physical size alone, though that is considerable, but because of what he carries, that specific, incalculable weight of a man who has spent his entire life being the person that other people answer to, the man that rooms organize themselves around. He is 68 years old, and he looks like something carved from the geography of a country that has survived everything. He wears a dark navy suit of the kind that is not purchased, but made by hands that understand fabric as an art form, made for a body that has not apologized for its own authority since before Damien Voss was out of graduate school. He moves without hurrying. This is the thing about Augusto Marchetti that the room absorbs immediately and cannot quite account for. He does not hurry. He has never in his life needed to hurry, because rooms wait for him rather than the reverse. He walks the length of the courtroom, past the gallery benches, past the whispers that have begun, that are spreading from person to person. Who is that? Who is that man? Does anyone? He does not look at Damien. He does not look at Caldwell. He does not look at the judge. He looks at his daughter. And when Elena hears the footsteps, the particular cadence of them, the unhurried certain rhythm she has known since she was a small girl, her spine does something extraordinary. It doesn't straighten further. It was already straight. It settles. Like a structure that has been holding itself up alone, suddenly finding its foundation restored beneath it. She closes her eyes. Just for one breath. One single breath. Augusto reaches the gallery rail behind Elena's table. He does not speak. He places one large hand on the wooden rail, and his presence, the simple warm fact of him standing there, reaches Elena like something she cannot name, like the specific gravity of home. She opens her eyes. But Augusto is not alone, because behind him the doors are still admitting people. 3 of his 4 surviving siblings, Elena's aunts and uncles, enter now, the Marchetti family's most senior generation. Silver-haired, dignified, moving with the collective gravity of people who understand exactly what they are doing and why. They take their seats in the gallery behind Elena, filling the empty benches with a presence that is not loud, not theatrical, simply absolute. And then the room goes very still in a different way. A new kind of still. The kind of still that happens when something appears that no one present was prepared to account for. At the back of the courtroom, moving slowly, with perfect composure, supported by a carved rosewood cane she holds like a scepter rather than a crutch, Constanza Marchetti enters. She is small, barely 5'1", in her black dress and her silk scarf and her 86 years of absolute unapologetic presence. And the courtroom, an institution of law and order that does not bow to anything, becomes a room that holds its breath. Marco materializes at her left side, not to support her, she does not need support, but because that is simply where a grandson stands when his grandmother walks into a room. She moves with the pace of a woman who has never once allowed urgency to define her terms. She reaches the gallery bench behind Elena. She sits. She folds her gloved hands over the head of her cane. She looks forward. And then something shifts in the room that Preston Caldwell will spend a very long time trying to understand. Because it is not simply the arrival of people. It is the arrival of recognition. The court clerk, who has been practicing law in this building for 19 years, looks up from her desk and goes very still, staring at the newly occupied gallery as though running a calculation she cannot complete quickly enough. Judge Hayes, who misses nothing, removes her glasses, examines the room, replaces her glasses. Her expression does not change. But something in her posture does. The almost imperceptible adjustment of a woman who has just understood something important about the case in front of her. A journalist, seated in the public gallery at the back, opens their notebook very quickly. And Damien Voss turns around. He had not turned immediately. He had been watching Caldwell's reaction first, reading his attorney's face for the calibration of his own, because that is how Damien has always operated, by reading the room through other people before committing to a position. What he sees on Caldwell's face makes him turn. He looks at the gallery behind Elena. The full gallery. The aunts and uncles. Marco. The older Marchetti family members, some of whom Damien has met exactly once, at the wedding, and whom he understood then to be significant, but had chosen not to investigate too carefully, because the details of his wife's family had never seemed as relevant as the idea of them. He looks at Augusto Marchetti standing at the gallery rail, and something moves through Damien's face, something complex and unpleasant, the first hairline crack in 7 hours of triumph. And then his eyes move to Constanza. And Damien Voss, who has faced down shareholders, negotiated with institutions, and managed his own arrogance across a career of considerable professional aggression, goes pale. Not dramatically, not cartoonishly. The color simply drains. The specific pallor of a man who has just run the arithmetic on a situation and found his own position catastrophically miscalculated. Because Constanza Marchetti is not simply an elderly woman. In certain circles, in the circles that actually govern things, the circles of generational wealth and old-world influence, and the kind of institutional relationships that predate corporations, Constanza Marchetti is a name that opens doors Damien Voss has spent his entire career trying to reach. Richard, behind him, sees the shift in his brother's posture. He leans forward. Damien. Damien does not answer. He is still looking at Constanza. Constanza, for her part, does not look at Damien Voss. She looks at her granddaughter. And Elena. Elena turns in her chair. Not all the way. Just enough. Just enough to look over her shoulder at the face of her grandmother, the face of her father, the face of her brother, and the tears that had gathered in her eyes and refused to fall for 7 hours do not fall now either. Because what replaces them is something so far beyond tears that it needs its own name. A light. Quiet, extraordinary, undefeatable light, coming from somewhere so deep inside her that Damien Voss could not have found it if he had been given 1,000 years and a map. She turns back to face the court. She straightens her already straight spine. She breathes. And Diana Reyes, beside her, opens a folder, the folder she has been waiting all day to open, and smooths the first page, and begins. The next 40 minutes are the undoing of Preston Caldwell's entire morning. Diana Reyes, now standing with the specific authority of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this moment, presents the court with documentation that Caldwell had not been provided in discovery, not because it was withheld illegally, but because it was assembled with such precision and introduced at such a specific moment that its impact is surgical. Financial records, communications. A series of documented instances in which Damien Voss had, over a period of 4 years, used Elena's family name and connections, without her knowledge, to leverage introductions to European institutional investors who would not have otherwise taken his calls. Letters, emails, meeting notes in Damien's own handwriting. The paper trail of a man who had spent 7 years mining his wife's heritage while performing indifference to it. Caldwell rises to object 3 times. Each time, Diana Reyes has the documentation to substantiate her position. Each time, Judge Hayes overrules. The 4th time Caldwell rises, Judge Hayes looks at him over her glasses in a way that makes him sit back down without completing the sentence. Damien Voss is very still. This is new for him, this particular stillness. It is not the composed stillness of a man in control. It is the frozen stillness of a man watching a structure he was certain was solid begin to list. His eyes move, they cannot help themselves, to the gallery behind Elena. To Augusto Marchetti, who has not moved, has not altered his expression, has simply continued to stand at that gallery rail with the patient, enormous presence of a man who came here to witness a specific thing and intends to witness it completely. Richard Voss leans forward and hisses something at the back of Damien's neck. Damien does not respond. Victoria, in the gallery, has uncrossed and recrossed her legs 3 times in the last 10 minutes. Her small, satisfied smile has been replaced by the expression of a woman rapidly revising her assumptions. And then Diana Reyes says something that changes the specific quality of the air in the room. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce one final piece of documentation, a signed statement from Mr. Augusto Marchetti, chairman of Marchetti International, attesting to the documented value of the family connections and reputational capital extended, without compensation or formal acknowledgement, to Voss Capital Group during the period of this marriage. This statement includes the assessment of a neutral, third-party forensic financial analyst who has placed a specific monetary figure on the value of that extension. She names the figure. The room goes very, very quiet. Damien's head turns sharply to his attorney. Caldwell is reading the document that Diana has just submitted to the bench. His face has taken on the particular coloration of a man who has just realized that the case he spent 6 weeks preparing was built on an assumption. The assumption that Elena Marchetti-Voss was exactly what she appeared, a woman alone, without resources, without support, without teeth. He had not done his research deeply enough. He had seen the empty gallery and stopped looking. Damien rises from his chair, a rare, uncontrolled impulse, and Caldwell's hand finds his arm immediately, pulling him back, because the very last thing they need right now is for Damien Voss to do anything unscripted in front of Judge Hayes. But in the half-second that Damien stood, his eyes found Elena. And Elena looked back at him. No triumph in her face, no satisfaction, no performance of victory, just clarity. The specific, unassailable clarity of a woman who knows exactly who she is, exactly where she comes from, and exactly how long she was willing to wait for the truth to be present in a room at precisely the right moment. Behind her, Constanza Marchetti lifts her chin. 1 millimeter. But every Marchetti in the room sees it and recognizes it for what it is. That is enough. We are done here. 3 weeks after the hearing, the Asset Division ruling arrives. It is, by every measurable standard, a complete vindication. Elena receives the settlement she was owed, appropriately recalibrated to reflect the full documented value of the connections and capital that had flowed through her family name during the marriage. Voss Capital Group absorbs the terms with the specific quiet of an organization that has been given a choice between compliance and considerably worse consequences. Damien does not contest the ruling. His attorney advises against it. His brother stops returning his calls for a while. Victoria is, as of last known information, doing some private revision of her own assumptions about the wisdom of certain alliances. The evening the ruling arrives, Elena is not alone. She is at dinner with her father and grandmother and brother at a quiet restaurant that Constanza specifically selected because she has known the owner for 40 years. The food is beautiful. The wine is the kind that does not need discussion. Marco orders everything without looking at the menu. Augusto sits at the head of the table and does not speak much, but every few minutes reaches over and places his hand on top of Elena's, once briefly the gesture of a man who has a great deal to say and has chosen this particular language for it. And Costanza Marchetti, who has not left her estate in 4 years, who crossed an ocean and entered a courtroom for the first time in her adult life, looks at her granddaughter across the table and says, in Italian, quietly enough for only Elena, "You were always your father's daughter, but today, you were mine." Here is what this story asks you to carry with you. The most dangerous assumption you can make about someone is that the empty space around them means they are alone. Isolation that appears total is sometimes simply patience. Helplessness that appears certain is sometimes simply strategy. And the person standing quietly in the center of their own storm, with their hands folded and their spine straight and their eyes fixed forward, may simply be waiting for the precise moment to open the doors. Never confuse someone's chosen silence with the absence of a voice. Never confuse the empty bench with the absence of love. Never underestimate a woman who knows exactly where she comes from. Now I want to hear from you. First, at what moment in this story did you feel the power shift? Was it when the doors opened? Or was it earlier, when you realized Elena had planned this all along? Second, have you ever been in a room where someone assumed you had no support, and they were very, very wrong? Tell me what that felt like. Third, Costanza traveled across an ocean and entered a courtroom for the first time in her adult life for Elena. Who in your life would cross that ocean for you, and would you even let them know you needed them? If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that your roots are not behind you, they are beneath you, share it with someone who needs to remember where they come from. Subscribe to Karma's Heiress, where dignity is never abandoned, power is never forgotten, and the doors always open at exactly the right moment.